Oh, there we go. Hello.
Thank you so much for coming here. I'm a super big fan of yours, and I'm just so
It's
excited to
weird to
talk
have
to you.
fans.
And is it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just I'm a wildlife advocate. I mean, I love what I do, but it's great because that means like you care about wildlife, so that's good.
Yeah, well, you have so many fans. I guess that must I can understand that, as I don't have like it's not like anyone knows my name. It's more just the band name. So if someone knew my name, I guess it would be pretty weird. But yeah, I am a fan of yours, and I do want to be sensitive to the fact that you just had a loss. And I'm so sorry about that. But I do want to talk about that if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. I mean, it has been weird. I mean, it is funny. Most of my work, I have to be a public figure, even before P22's death. And but I'm actually kind of an introvert. I mean, I'm good at being an extrovert, but I'm much happier when I'm at home reading and not having to talk. But yeah, it was really I don't know, interesting is the word I use when I'm not quite sure how to evaluate it. But I'm an animal person. I have my dogs will wander through here. I have 5 dogs and 2 cats.
Wow.
But
So
I've
exciting.
I've lost so many animals in my lifetime, had to euthanize, be there when they were euthanized. But I also, so that's grief, but I didn't at the same time have to talk about it on CNN. And that was
Right.
really interesting. I had to do my job, yet I was also grieving, and it wasn't bad. In fact, in some respects, part of the worldwide attention to P22's death really helped get me through it. But it was just odd. I don't know how celebrities do it, right? Where everything they go through is public. That was odd. But yeah, no, I mean, let's talk. I mean, we should talk about it.
Yeah, well, I recently listened to a podcast about a person who was going through grief right before this whole situation with P22, and I was just like, wow, like before I talked to you, I was like, is this even right? But I was like, yeah, it is your life work and so important. And I guess I was wondering, like, in my mind, when I talked to the podcast editor or whatever, I was like, I think it's P22's best friend. What do you call yourself in terms of P22?
That's what I think I have on like my Twitter and Facebook.
Okay.
It was P22's BFF. I mean,
Okay.
people call me his agent, his manager, his PR rep. I mean, but I like P22's BFF.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. And is like, can you talk about, I guess, your just life, but at what point you found out about P22, at what point you became his BFF, at just the whole the history of your relationship to him, if that's okay.
Oh, absolutely, sure. And yeah, I'm curious if you were asking him if he considered me his BFF, if he would answer that. He I think sometimes he was in Griffith Park like, what is that blonde chick doing now? She's got a t-shirt made with my name. She's carrying around my likeness. But when I got to meet him at the end, he didn't seem to hold it against me. But yeah, I think, listen, I've been joking about this, I'm Irish from Boston, so of course when we have tragedy we always try to find humor. But P22 is the longest serious relationship of my life. And, he was love at first sight. And I don't think it's an accident that he was the longest serious relationship of my life, in that we only met once, right? That probably explains why it was such a lasting relationship. But I discovered him like a lot of people did, especially in LA, which was that first article that the LA Times wrote in 2012. Martha Groves, who will actually be at the Celebration of Life, wrote it. And it was kind of they didn't even name him in the headline at the time. It was Mountain Lion, makes a home in Griffith Park. And at the time I had just started my job with the National Wildlife Federation. For my job, I was working on a book about California wildlife. So I called up really initially about just as almost like a little side story in the book. And I almost didn't believe it. I was like, there is no way there's a mountain lion living in Los Angeles. I admit, until working on P22, I had I'm not from California, I'm from Boston, but California's home. I've been here, 32, 33 years now, but like any good snobbish Northern Californian, you don't go to LA much, and
Yeah.
maybe been there half a dozen times.
Oh, okay.
And called up Jeff Sikich, the biologist named in the article. At the time, I didn't know him. Now he's a really good friend. And I was like, is this true? Like, I thought it was fake news, wasn't a term back then, but I would have used it. I was like, this has to be fake news. And so I went down to LA. I'd never been to Griffith Park. And I was like, this is here. Oh my God, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And he took me out tracking P22. We didn't see him, but we got, kind of close to him. And he told me not just about P22's plight, but all the mountain lions in the Santa Monica Mountains in the LA area, what they were facing with our roadways and isolation. And there was something about what P22 had, crossing these freeways. And Jeff also drove me like what P22 had to, his journey. And it just like, there was this like immense empathy for this animal who was trying to make it. It was the only way he could live in the most improbable places. And I think that's where it was really love at first sight. And then at the end of the day, I turned to Jeff and was like, so, how can I help with your work? This is so important. And he, it was like, well, there's this like wildlife crossing we're trying to get built. And I'm like, sure, how hard can it be? Like, not knowing that was going to be 10 years of my life and $100 million I had to raise. But
oh, wow.
So yes, that is how P22 came to me.
That's incredible. So are you, I know you've written a bunch of books, but are you, like, you would say that animals, that's your passion?
Yeah, animals have always animals and wildlife, both domestic. Again, I blame it on my parents. Growing up, we always had we were the house that took in every stray. We had ponies and dogs and cats and gerbils, and mom fed the birds. So I grew up just around animals. Now, where I grew up in Massachusetts, the biggest wildlife I was going to see was a squirrel, or a turtle.
Right.
At that point, wildlife had been really banished from the suburbs. I grew up in the suburbs of Boston, and we had frogs and squirrels and birds and a turtle, and but not even like a raccoon or like.
Wow.
Now, if you go back to my neighborhood now at schools, they have deer and bobcats and coyotes, but when I was growing up, it had been eradicated. So I didn't have big stuff to connect to. It was the little stuff like frogs.
Right. Sorry, sorry to interrupt you, but
no,
I guess
interrupt.
What do you attribute the animals being back to? How did they get back home?
Yeah, for the longest time, there was both a scientific notion and also I think a cultural notion that, animals should not be where people are. And, we have a long history in this, not just this country, but of eradicating predators and eradicating wildlife and making human landscapes. So I think both the tolerance has increased over time, but also the animals coming back themselves, right? They had been banished and poisoned and hunted and all that stuff. But so both the tolerance increased, but also their ability to come back, P22 is a great example of that, right?
Yeah.
There had been a mountain lion in Griffith Park sighted for decades, probably could, they had been banished, but they're starting to expand. Coyotes are a great example of this in any city. They had been, tried to banished and hunted and poisoned, but they keep coming back. You can't hold them down,
Yeah. No, that's so interesting. There's definitely, I live in Los Angeles, and I live in Elysian Park. And so coyotes are a daily thing that's just really, I grew up in Los Angeles, so seeing mammals is like, wasn't as common when I was a kid, but now, it's like my favorite thing. But I think it's so cool to just have found that story and really became an advocate for him. And I think that's super cool. And so, like, I guess you're a conservation leader. What does that mean?
Yeah, it means running around with a cardboard cutout of a mountain lion talking about improving their dating lives, right?
Yeah.
So my career has been a little different than like sort of the typical environmentalist. I have a scientific training and I consider myself a scientist, but
Okay.
it's not my day job. It's not my day job. It is not, that's like Jeff and Seth and the National Park Service study. I consider my job putting science in action. So the National Park Service tells me these mountain lions are in trouble and here's what we need to do, build a wildlife crossing. Me as a conservation leader is right. How do we make that happen? And that, is a number of things. Then how do we get the funds? How do we build the public support? How do we make sure mountain lions are protected? How do we make sure, people can coexist, and feel safe? Like it's being a conservation leader like that is, it's almost like quarterback or, just or bringing all the different, and like that was my role with the wildlife crossing and P22, right? You had all these wonderful partners like the Park Service, the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, Caltrans, all doing stuff, but like NWF, what our organization overall does well is like sort of being the people that sort of facilitate the collaboration. So for me, it's almost like coach, or I'm not even sure what the app description, but somebody described me as like the mayor of the crossing in P22, and that like it is kind of creating a community around this work and ensuring that everybody's rowing, in the same direction. So it's kind of like that. So I love it because, it's really interesting. Dun, dun, dun.
Hi, I'm sorry.
Oh, don't be sorry. It kept recording, so you're probably
Okay, good.
Yeah, kept recording.
Okay, good. Well, do you mind repeating?
No.
the-
Yeah, no, I
My
feel like,
benefit?
yeah, I feel, do you want the whole thing or just the last sentence or how,
If you remember what you said, the whole thing, that would be
Oh yeah,
good.
sure. Yeah,
What-
so I what does a conservation leader do? So, it's a lot, right? Like I said, it's carrying a cutout around of P22 and talking about the dating lives of, the real cougars of LA, not the house. But no, I have a science background and undergrad. But I'm not a scientist. It's not my day job. I also have an MBA, right? So my role has been conservation leadership, so executive director, and what it is making. I sort of translate it into turning science into action. So, like the National Park Service tells me these mountain lions are threatened. Here's the science behind it, and here's what we need to do. We need to build a wildlife crossing. Then that's my job to assemble what we need to do. All facets, whether, the public support, the funding, the agency support, bringing all the partners together and making sure that we all row in the same direction to make something happen. There's some incredible partners with the wildlife crossing that, again, we were sort of the last one, but that's what the National Wildlife Federation, my organization, does well. We are known as kind of facilitators to collaborate on large scale projects. So that was me trying to just, keep everybody on track, do what was needed, and of course, get the public support and raise the funding. But also a little deeper overall is to also just broadly get support for and connect people. It's not just about sort of the science, and it's not just about, the conservation action and stuff, but it's about ensuring that people connect to wildlife and love it, and have these connections that then lead to people accepting coyotes in their neighborhoods, right? So I think as a little girl, that's what brought me to conservation. It wasn't science, although we need the science, don't get me wrong, we need it. But none of us, I think most of us don't love wildlife because of the scientific papers. Because when we were kids or even as adults, something captured our imagination. I watched Musical of Omaha's Wild Kingdom or Flipper. You know, I had frogs in my backyard. So I think that's part of it, is this kind of almost storytelling that is part of my job too, to make sure that people are connecting with wildlife in meaningful ways.
Yeah, I guess I'm sorry, but this is a heroes podcast. I usually say that at the beginning, and I tell the person, like, you are on a heroes podcast,
Oh,
because you are a hero. But I think all of those things that you said are totally true, but the way that you spun this tale is just, I think, is like, I mean, is just the most amazing thing ever. Because yes, that all of those things are the goal, but the way you made P22 exciting to everyone and made it something that, I mean, people I didn't even know would ever even think about anything outside of their, phone and car and whatever their little inner circle, are like talking about wildlife, which is, I mean, you did like a really, really, really great job. And I know that, I know you're a scientist and all those other things, but it's so funny. It was so funny, like how he's, a bachelor and all that stuff, and just finding all of those things is really just amazing. I had to just tell you again, is like, as much as anyone might be a conservation leader, you're a hero, you're amazing, and you did such a great job. And yeah, it's so cool, and you made it fun. I think that that's something that usually is what's missing with most of these stories, is people are used to hearing things from fear or motivated by greed or whatever else, but you just made it fun. And I think that it's historic. And I just really wanted to.
I mean, thank you. I appreciate it. Listen, it was a lot of work and a lot of sacrifice. Listen, this was not easy. And I don't feel like a hero. I just feel like this is my passion. And to me, it was a moral imperative. Like, how dare I not do something now that I know I can try to fix it, right? I mean, I feel sometimes really helpless when I see the polar bears starving, because I do feel helpless to fix that. But when Jeff told me, I just remember very clearly that day, like, you just need a wildlife crossing to fix that? Well, shoot, we can get that done. But
Right.
But you're right. I mean, I'm not saying this to give myself kudos, but it was different in precedent setting. And early on, I got a lot of flack. I still get flack for it. Even some people at my own organization are like, how dare you anthropomorphize? How dare you? You can't carry a cutout around. You can't talk about mountain lions dating. And I yeah, I mean, because like when I was coming up, it's a little scary to admit, college was over 30 years ago, but the dominant view of what you were trained as a scientist, not that I ever bought into this, is more, I'm a scientist, but I'm also an animal rights person, right? So I think I'm the perfect blend of the two. And science science is now showing us that what all animal people knew for years, it's, animals have language and culture and feel pain. And so I think science is catching up to those of us who had emotional connections all along. But we were taught back then, you don't name animals, you don't anthropomorphize, you don't. And, nowadays I'm like, come on, that's just stupid. Like, anthropomorphize, we are animals. So why wouldn't we anthropomorphize? Because they do behave, if not exactly like us. But we still get some flack for it. Like, listen, there was some articles around P22's death, which, listen, people can disagree. I have no problem with it, but that were like literally criticizing us for crying when we made the announcement. Like, how can you criticize compassion? Like, you just sorry, that's the old school. That is just, you need to history's not going to be on your side if you're sticking with don't be compassionate about wildlife. So yeah, it was unprecedented. I think part of that was my compassion side, but also my MBA kicking in. Like, I kind of joke, you asked at the beginning, like what title. I also sometimes liken myself to like Ari on Entourage, if you watch that show, I mean, I also knew P22 would be good as a, the sort of face of this campaign, because I saw how people were responding, including myself, to his story. So, there was part of that was really purposeful once I saw how people reacted to him, but it mostly came from a place of compassion, that he was a remarkable animal. And, again, I'm just so grateful I get to be on the planet at the same time. It's
Oh
you
my
know,
God.
I liken it to like being on the planet with like great artists, you know, that I got to hear their music or got to, you know, or read their books. Like, I'm just glad our times on this planet coincided.
I guess I didn't realize that about scientific training or science in school. Is it changing at all?
Yeah, I think there's a big change. I mean, there's a few things that have changed. One is this sort of urban wildlife movement, right? Again, that view of conservation for so long, what I was taught in schools is you put the animals in the national parks and the wildlife refuges, and you put the people here, and never the two should meet. I did a TED talk early on in P22, and one of my, I live up near Yosemite most of the time, although I consider LA a second home. And one of my Yosemite colleagues, who I worked with for years, I worked in Yosemite for 10 years.
Wow.
I did this talk about P22 and how we really needed to, us as people had to adapt to wildlife in our human spaces because, the number one threat to wildlife worldwide was loss of habitat. We had to start sharing our space. And also this notion of connectivity had to run through our human spaces. And so I'm going over like the P22 story and how people were sharing, and she comes up to me after, and we're friends, but she's like, oh my God, you just did a talk on everything I've spent my life trying to avoid. We don't want people together. And I remember her saying to me, studies have been shown that wildlife are more stressed in cities. And I'm like, well, I'm more stressed in a city. Who isn't, right? So, but does that mean they don't get to live? I mean, come on.
Yeah.
So I do think now you have like the International Urban Wildlife Conference. So I think this consideration of wildlife being in our urban spaces is changed whole scale. And also how we consider and value wildlife, at least in California, and I think in other areas of the country it is. Like even P22 in any other state in this country, if he had shown up in a Griffith Park, he would have been shot or removed immediately upon detection 10 years ago. So
Yeah.
California has this, what I think is a really wonderful ethic, and what I do hope and I think the world is getting to. I mean, look at, movies like Blackfish and, showing that we need to think about how we live with animals differently and treat them. California Fish and Wildlife about 6 or 7 years ago changed their name from California Fish and Game to show that people valued wildlife beyond a meal, right?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So California has this, I think, really progressive wildlife ethic, which I love, but I think the world's catching on. We are now seeing that animals, we're not the top. We are, we are all animals. We're all part of the same ecosystem. And we're not better or worse. We all have, I can't smell as good of a dog. Octopuses are way smarter than me, right? So I do think the world's changing towards animals, and California is probably, the leader in this in some respects. I mean, just look at how in P22's death, it is unprecedented for, a wildlife agency to let a wildlife activist like me in the room to make an announcement, to do a video announcement about the decision to euthanize. Like, that is a game changer, and it's good. It's good.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. And I think it's interesting because there's not, there's a few times where what's happening with like social media and everyone's access to seeing everything and having opinion time. There's a few examples of when that's good. And I feel like this is a situation where they did the right thing for whatever reason, but also like they knew people were watching. And so I feel like that played a role in doing the right thing and actually trying to be moral rather than just, do what is typical. But I do think that that's super interesting that I guess like if you think of, I'm not a religious folk, but I guess a person that's super religious might think animals are different than people. And I guess it's just kind of weird. This is the first time I've ever heard or thought about that science kind of thinks that way too. I think that that's so strange that that just is blowing my mind. But I guess I did want to read a quote that you have on your website, or part of a quote by Henry Beston.
Yeah, actually, it's so funny. I was just about to quote that when you said
Yeah.
that. Yeah, no, go ahead,
Okay.
read it. It's one of my favorite quotes. I
Yeah,
love this quote.
part is in a world older and more complete than ours, animals, they're more finished and complete, gifted with extensions of the senses we have lost or never attained, living by voices we shall never hear. Like, that is mind-blowing. It's just, yeah, they have, I think, I mean, I believe in everything. And I think, like, when people talk about being psychic or all of these things, it's like dogs are psychic. Their
Right.
noses are so incredible that they can smell a dog that was there 5 hours ago, and all of these things. And it's just so incredible that yeah, just to think of that. I guess, what do you think, and you've already answered it kind of, but people's perception of animals is changing? Do you think?
Yeah. And I think it's good. Yeah. And if you complete that quote, I love the last part.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
It gets at what the ethic I'm going for, and what I think we saw with P22 is, which he says, they are not brethren, they're not underlings, they are other nations caught with ourselves in the net of life and time, fellow prisoners of the splendor and travail of the earth. And I think that is perfect. Like, P22 wasn't a pet. He was we'd wave to him, people, but we recognized he was part of our world in a way that to me was inherently hopeful. And that's what I want for all, like, that we give wildlife the same considerations we give our usual neighbors. Now, I don't talk to all my neighbors. I don't have them all over for dinner, and that's great. But I mean, that's the same thing with wildlife. If you see a coyote walking through your yard, hey, how's it going? You like that. We don't fear them. We also don't try to make them pets, but they just become a part of our world in a way that I think historically we have separated ourselves from and thought ourselves above them or not part. Listen, if anything, the pandemic has been, I think, a big wake up for many that, in climate, that we are not, we're part of nature. We might forget it sometimes, but we are not immune. In fact, nature bats last. And part of why we had, and we're still kind of in a pandemic, was because we disrupted healthy ecosystems. So even if you don't like mountain lions and don't want them around, you probably want them around because you start pulling a mountain lions out of, like, if we killed all the mountain lions in LA, I can, this isn't a very scientific, because you can never say for sure, but I would say my money is on that would disrupt human health pretty quickly. You would see resounding effects. Science has shown that you pull out top predators in any landscape, then you have a deer overpopulation. There's been, like, where I grew up, as we talked about, we didn't have anything very big on the landscape back east when I was growing up. And in fact, still the eastern panther, another name for mountain lion, just a mountain lion, went extinct years ago. What do you have back east? Overpopulation of deer. What do you also have back east? Way high incidences of Lyme disease.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
To the deer. So some scientists have called, like, bring the cougar back, bring the eastern panther back, because, we start messing with the world that we think ourselves outside of. Yeah. You get a pandemic, you get disease, you get any number of things. So I think that gets back to, yes, I think, not just California, but overall, again, I cite, like, Blackfish is changing attitudes about killer whales, on and on. I think that we are, as a society, sort of grappling with animals. The old myths about them don't track. I mean, what does it say? Like again, I'm vegan. Once in a while I'll eat some cheese, but pretty much vegan. Never eat meat again. I mean, when you learn that a pig is actually like a dog, it's a lot harder to eat a pig, right? I mean,
no,
and I think
for sure.
Yeah, and I think that now, and that I agree with you. For me, listen, any technology can be used for ill. I do not share the notion that social media is bad. Remember, I mean, you're younger, but books were once thought of as bad, right? They burned, so it's people who are behind social media. I mean, I always say Hitler didn't need social media to rise up, right? So but yes, any technology can be used for bad. But I do think when it comes to wildlife and animals, social media has been good because it does allow like a P22 where people can build a relationship and learn more about wildlife, and they become less scary. And that opens the door for this new ethic you're asking about.
That's so cool. Yeah, I feel like that movie Blackfish, I feel like things like that does just break open this knowledge to people that they didn't have. And I don't know. I know some
Or my
people
octopus's teacher.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And that these things can be shared more widely. Like again, when I was growing up, like you had one shot to see something once a year on TV, right? Or once a year in the movies. You did not have, so that a video of how an octopus is a being that has intelligence can be shared a million times. That is exposure that we wouldn't have had, 10 years ago. And yes, that gets it why I do think people are reckoning. It's no longer something that is inaccessible, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's super cool. I mean, I've definitely learned in stages that all beings are beings. Like there's definitely, I didn't have I think sometimes it has to be a personal connection. Like I met a snake and I saved it from a cat and it looked me in the eye and I was like, oh, I'm helping you. And I was like, oh, now snakes, I get it now. Like they're just like a dog, or you know what I mean? Like sometimes it has to be like that. But yeah, I guess just it's so important what you're doing because there's other ways like, Blackfish, or I also noticed like PETA, for example, definitely makes their point. I know not everyone's a huge fan of theirs, but I feel like they're one of the best sort of advertising, the best at advertising their cause of,
they're brilliant. They are brilliant at marketing. I agree.
Yeah.
I don't always agree with everything they do, but yeah, they are brilliant at getting the point across. And I think you do have to go to the extreme sometimes, even to get people to be moderate. So I think that's where, their tactics come in. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to listen, the wild world can be terrifying. Like it is not this kind, I've been watching, The Last of Us. Have you been watching that? That's, oh my God, that is so
I haven't
good.
started yet, but
Now it's not wildlife, but they get into, for me, it's scarier than The Walking Dead. I love anything zombies I'm in.
Oh, okay, cool.
The Walking Dead, what was scary was the zombies didn't scare me in The Walking Dead. It was the people, right? The people were terrifying, right?
Okay.
Like, but what's wonderful about what they do so well, like what's scary in The Last of Us is this fungus that has adapted and evolved. And it's based on a fungus that does do the same thing to wasp and spiders and stuff that literally takes over and makes you a zombie. And but it to me it gets at that, like, the wild world is not this pastoral, peaceful, it can be quite cutthroat, but I think, but so can people, right? And so like I don't want people to also romanticize wildlife. I mean, P22 needs to eat, right? He needs to kill deer, and there's never zero risk with wildlife any more than there's zero risk with people. I can't tell you're going to walk down the street tomorrow and that you'll be 100% safe from being mugged or murdered, right? I mean, so but what I ask people to do is just put wildlife in perspective, respect wildlife, but don't fear them. I mean, that any more than we walk down the street in constant fear of people, because people are way more riskier to be around than wildlife.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess, I mean, it seems pretty clear that when they're left alone, like in great expansive places, they're doing just fine. They have their cycle and their system and they're fine. It's just us that really is ruining everything, I guess. Right?
I think the wildlife has shown, like my book When Mountain Lions Are Neighbors was really on, it was people and wildlife working it out in California. It really was showing how it's us that need to adapt more. The wildlife are adapting as best they can. I mean, look at P22 living under the Hollywood sign. You had like condors nesting in human spaces. You had, foxes living on the Facebook campus. They're doing everything they can. Like I don't think P22 is ever in Griffith Park thinking, oh, I want to be in a Yosemite. He just wasn't, right? So they're adapting. They're not longing for these pastoral nature settings, but it's us who usually have the hangups, like, well, why? Wait a minute, he shouldn't be there. There's people there,
Yeah.
And so, and listen, I had that for the longest time. It really was P22 that changed the game. So yeah, I think it's that people just need to. I think, most of us trained since birth to have a preconception of where wildlife should be, or what it means to live with wildlife or not. That, again, we can't even ignore the science around now. We just have to change our views because they're wrong.
Yeah.
They're
And
wrong.
thank you so much. And is there any like headbutting with environmentalists, or do you guys agree generally on all of this?
Oh yeah, no, there's headbutting. So there's still I'd say if we're just talking sort of wildlife, right? I think there's still, like we talked about with, being criticized for crying over P22. I think there's a lot of agencies across the country or nonprofits that approach wildlife still from that very, what I call the North American model of wildlife, which is we manage it. Part of managing it is us, killing it. And I think what we're moving towards is this new sort of compassionate conservation, is for a word I've heard that I like, which is that, there are times where we have to make difficult decisions and do have to euthanize or, take out wildlife. I mean, if you have a grizzly bear, and I lived in Yellowstone, that is, killing people, listen, that, there's just, we much like if a person was going through your neighborhood, right, killing people, you would have to do something, right? Yeah. So I think there's always the extreme cases where we do have to allow for that animals are going to have to be managed in a way that does allow for euthanasia or humane. But I do think, this sort of more compassionate notion of first do no harm is, I think, what, we're seeing more so in California. And I think, other places are starting to look at it, that the wildlife has value in itself, not just how we manage it. To me, it gets back to a more indigenous view of wildlife. Now, indigenous people had to eat wildlife, right? I mean, listen, I'm a vegan. But I recognize, listen, if you're somebody who's locally hunting, wildlife, I wouldn't do it. I may not agree with it, but I respect that's, a good decision. I'd rather see that than these vast slaughterhouses of, which are just,
yes.
But, the indigenous value was that wildlife are neighbors. And yeah, when we do have to eat our neighbors, we respect it. We honor that. And I think that for me, that's the ethic I feel like we are circling to, at least that I hold, that, wildlife are teachers, they're neighbors, they're community members. And yeah, I do think that value system is really starting to catch on. You see like a rise in veganism as well. I mean, my God, I couldn't get any, being a vegan even 5 or 10 years ago, your options were tofu and carrots and rice. And now look at, I can take my meat eating friends, I can go to a meat restaurant and still get great vegan options, right?
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. I think that's a good hopeful point, is that we go on tour all the time, and for the past 7 years or so, and there's definitely, it did go from being just like you can have that but just without the meat, to like there is actual food you can eat that's healthy and as a normal meal. But that's actually true of every state in America. So,
it is. It is everywhere. I was in New Orleans, big meat eating state, and I plenty of vegan restaurants. So yeah, I think that ethic, do we need everybody to go vegan? No. I mean, again, listen, I'm a biologist. We're part of the food chain. But we as humans, I think what's good is do have the choice now not to, because we do have these options. But for me, I think if we just got back to more, if a lot of people just got back to more meat as a, you look at our human history, meat was on the table maybe 20% of the time, we mostly were. And I think that, and again, when a lot of indigenous peoples did have to go to hunt. It was done with ritual and purpose. And I think that at least would, show some respect for this wildlife in a way we don't when we eat now. We
Yeah.
just don't. We don't kill our own food, so we don't have to face that pig looking at us, right?
Yeah.
And I think people, but I think it's just what we eat, though. I think it's also, like we talked about, the tolerance for these wild animals on the landscape is increasing as well, like P22 or coyotes, and recognizing that, again, it's not zero risk, and we have to kind of step up and take some responsibility, because the animals can't, like, when P22 started, at the end of his life there, his behavior changed radically, as we know. I mean, literally the last 6 weeks, and now we know why. He was in immense distress, but for 10 years, he had, lived quite like a mountain lion in Griffith Park. He was limited by being trapped, but Griffith Park has some very inaccessible areas. That's where he'd mainly retreat during the day to sleep. Mountain lions, their primary prey is deer. That's what they want to take down. But he'd take down an occasional. They had a couple times, a dog that had wandered into Griffith Park. He'd eaten dogs a couple times. For the most part, he ate deer. He'd come into the neighborhoods to travel, but he wouldn't stay there or hang out. And then the last 6 weeks, all of a sudden, he's going after dogs. It killed that first one, and then it just became a pattern. He's hanging out in the urban areas, but there was still a tolerance for him, and people still. And I think that, again, it's never zero risk, but we can do things to protect our pets and livestock that, for him, a dog is just, he doesn't know it's our pets. He just sees it as a coyote, right? Or like when he took the koala out of the zoo, which,
this is amazingly, I mean,
you just can't beat that.
Yeah,
he takes out one of the cutest animals on the planet, but also, like, koalas and mountain lions never met before in evolution
he doesn't
history,
know.
So but he just thought it was a raccoon. So, but what I love is people did step up, right? People, for the most part, with mountain lions or coyotes, are doing simple things to make sure. We have to help them be successful. I remember up where I live up here outside Yosemite, I have mountain lions, bears in my yard, you name it. I am wild kingdom.
That's so cool.
I have 5 dogs and 2 cats. I've never had a problem. You know why? My cats are always indoors. My dogs have a 8-foot run. They're not out at night. They're in a, predators can't, and they sleep inside with me. So there is ways to coexist that I think we have to step up. And I remember a neighbor up here posted on a community board once, well, I'm all about coexistence, but the bear broke into my chicken coop, so that's it. I'm going to shoot him. He broke the rules. And I remember responding to her like, the bear doesn't know the rules. That's like telling a kid, you picked up the matches, a toddler, you picked up the matches, you deserve to get burned because you should know the rules. And so I think that we know the rules, the wildlife, that bear didn't know the chickens were a death sentence. So it's up to us to make sure we have chicken coops that predators can't get in, right? That's up to us. And I think most people in LA are willing to do that. And that's what's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for talking about all this. I guess just like last question is, what do you think the a major thing people can do right now to help, even if it's just in their mind, or what do you think is the major thing that you wish people would do right now?
I probably a couple things. One is just, explore, learn a little about wildlife. They become a lot less scary, right? I mean, if I can see why, if somebody is, on a trail and sees a 130-pound cat hissing at them, if you don't know mountain lion behavior, why you'd be scared of that. Because that's looks like a scary situation. But indeed, if you knew a little bit about mountain lion behavior, you'd know the mountain lion in that situation is probably terrified of you and telling you, get away. Right. So I think learning about rattlesnakes or black widows, like everybody kills rattlesnakes and black widows. Black widows are the most non-aggressive spider you can think of. You go towards their web, they will cower. Now, there's no doubt if you get bit, it can be serious, but you don't have to kill them all. In fact, you don't want to kill them all. They take out pests you want. So you can relocate them if you find them. Same thing with rattlesnakes. Listen, they can be deadly, but on the other hand, we don't want a world without rattlesnakes, because then you have vermin, and they are the most non-aggressive snakes also. They will do everything they can. So learning a bit about wildlife, I think, really helps with the fear, which then helps, us not automatically react by killing something if it's, if we see it. I think the other thing is look at your homes. I think one of the best things the National Wildlife Federation does, my organization, is what we call our Certified Wildlife Habitat or Backyard for Wildlife program. You can find it on the nwf.org website. There are simple things you can just do on your apartment balcony, in your backyard, that help wildlife. Put in some native plants, a bird bath. Wildlife has lost so much habitat that even small little changes like that can help. Look at your property through a wildlife's eye. Are you using poisons? Get rid of them. Do you have lights on all night? Or do you have really glaring lights? That disrupts bird migrations, bats, you name it. Is your fences inaccessible? Is it forcing wildlife to cross roads? Simple things like that add up for a huge difference. So those are simple things you every day can do and they really make a big difference.
Thank you so much. That's amazing. Those are easy things to do. And I will link your website and their website on the show notes. Is there any last thing you would like to say?
I am so grateful to Angelenos and also the world. Again, part of my very personal grief, and I had to sort of have the professional side of that too. But what helped was just seeing, this P22 trended on Twitter. He was in Rolling Stone magazine. But to me, that was, it was fun to get the press, but it was deeper than that. It means people care. And so I think I just want to say a big thanks. It was a really hard time for me. It was hard to have to do interviews. I get to sit with P22 and say goodbye to him. That was the hardest moment of my life. Not, talking to him and knowing I could not do anything to help him. But what got me through that was just seeing that is hopeful for somebody like myself, who's been working in wildlife conservation for 30 years now, to see the world rally around this cat and grieve collectively. You don't get many moments like that. I kind of liken it to like when Game of Thrones was on and we all grieved over it. You could be on Twitter like, oh my God, I'm sad too. But he brought us together, and I hope that he will continue to bring, there's not a lot of things we agree on these days. And I think for the most part, he brought in his bringing, like with our celebration of life, he brought LA together. And I think only good things can come of that.
Yeah,
for sure. Thank you is what I want to say.
Yeah, thank you so much. Oh, I just want to ask you one quick question too. Is you wrote about our band, or P22 wrote about it years and years ago. Do you remember that?
I do. I remember when we first connected years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, because you guys did didn't I send you t-shirts?
Yeah, I have all that stuff.
I remember that.
Yeah, it just was like, that like was the coolest thing ever. I wanted to thank you.
I forget how that I think you mentioned him on stage or something, or you commented on his page. And this was when I was solely running, I think, the P22 Facebook page. Yeah, I've since got help. But the first 5 years it was me being P22 on Facebook and a colleague of mine, Lee. But then we have some social. I haven't totally given up because it is my favorite thing I've ever done. But I think you guys commented on a post. I forget, but it ended up in a fun connection. Yeah, it was
that was so cool. I remember that was something I shared with like my little nephews, and everybody's like, "Kill a Mountain Lion likes our band."
I remember that.
Well, thank you so much. And
thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. We'll see you later. Bye.